Welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, healer, tarot extraordinaire, and your local witch next door. And today I'll be talking about the Knight of Wands. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. The best way to support the podcast right now is to listen daily, rate, review, and to follow or subscribe in your chosen podcast app. If you're loving the podcast and want to connect with me further, check out my Patreon. I'm recording a question and answer episode just for you, so you can go to my Patreon and comment with any questions you have for me, things related to the podcast or tarot in general. If you're local to the greater Puget Sound area, I'd love to see you at my next Let's Talk Tarot meetup group event. If you'd like to be the first to hear about upcoming events, presentations, musings, and info and photos of my day-to-day life, you can sign up for my weekly newsletter. You also get my free PDF with the 2025 5-card tarot spread I created just for you at the beginning of this year when you sign up. If you don't already know, I'm a sex and relationships therapist seeing clients virtually all over Washington state. I love working with queer, poly, and witchy clients who might be struggling with anxiety, chronic pain or illness, communication issues, self-advocacy, and sex. Book a free 20-minute consultation now to see if we're a good fit to work together. You can find the links for any of these offers in the show notes or on my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot, in addition to the images of the cards I pull on each episode. So welcome to Season 6. I am talking all about the Suit of Wands in this season. If you haven't listened to my other seasons yet, you should check those out. The first season, I talked about tarot basics. Seasons 2 and 3, I went through the major arcana. In Season 4, I talked all about tarot and pop culture. And in Season 5, I went through 13 common tarot spreads. We're in Season 6 now, like I said, and we're talking all about the Suit of Wands. If you want to hear an episode dedicated to an overview of the whole Suit of Wands, you can check out Season 3, Episode 10. And today I'm talking about the Knight of Wands. So the Knight of Wands is often depicted in images or symbols with movement, journey, fleas or flight, impatience, fieriness, and adventure. So I'm looking at 3 different decks portrayal of the Knight of Wands. So in the Therapist Who Tarot deck, prompts by Drea Bloom and images by Rebecca Bloom, it depicts a person in like a rowboat using their wand as like a paddle. They look like they're out in the middle of the water, and the word at the bottom of the card is journey. So, right, they're moving along, they're going somewhere, they're seemingly sort of alone, but they're on some sort of adventure here, journey. In the Anima Mundi Tarot deck by Megan Weirer-Lendon, there's a bunny or like a hare, a rabbit depicted. It's sort of in flight, I would say. So it's, jumping right now, coming in from like the right side of the card. We can see its front feet and part of its back leg, but none of it is touching the ground. So again, we get that movement, like it's on a journey. Maybe it's fleeing, or it's, going to chase something down that it wants. Maybe it sees some good grass or something it needs to get. There's some grass depicted underneath it, and then we get an image of like a wand or the tree branch at the top of the card. And then in the Goddess of Love Tarot deck by Gabriella Herstick and illustrated by Julia Popescu, we get what's called the Witch of Wands. So they renamed this card. And here we have like a landscape image at the bottom, like a natural. We see trees and a waterfall and like a stump and some rolling hills. And then we get sort of like a palace or castle or some level of like ruins behind it. And then sort of superimposed on top of that, we get like a leopard or cheetah, I'm not quite sure, with like a sort of Roman or Greek statue of a woman seated where it looks like she's basically riding the leopard. She has sort of fabric draped around her, but it almost forms this like cape behind her, almost like, again, as if she's riding this leopard and her cape's flowing behind her. And then she's holding on to this, what would be to her like a giant rose. as like her wand, right? Or perhaps her staff, or maybe she's sort of going right into battle or on a journey. Maybe this is a weapon. But the rose is almost like taller than she is. So this rose, right, is depicting the wand here, and wands are depicted as roses in this deck. But yeah, we get that sort of like, again, the cat, the leopard is sort of, the back legs look like they could maybe be on the ground, and then the front are out in the air, like she's riding this creature, and there's a lot of movement. We get like a lot of depth in the card as well, like maybe, again, sort of that journey aspect. In the Library of Esoterica, Tarot book by Taschen, they talk about that this card is all about fleeting desires. The Knight of Wands points to our restlessness and desire to be loved and asks us to confront our tendencies to be impetuous and impatient. And again, that's from the Library of Esoterica, Tarot book by Taschen. Let's take a look at some of our other books and how they speak about this card. So in the Tarot and Astrology book by Corrine Kenner, they talk about that Sagittarius is associated with the Knight of Wands, and they call it an unstoppable explorer of mutable fire. Like fire itself, the Knight of Wands can be spellbinding. Without a safe place to burn, however, it can rage out of control, it can become violent, unstable, and destructive. Knights, right, who we consider the adventurers or rescuers of the deck, are inherently fiery individuals. Each one combines the element of fire with the element of his own suit. So the Knight of Wands, however, is the only court card that embodies the passionate combination of fire with fire, right? Because the wand suit is already a fire suit, and then the knights themselves are fiery. So we have double fire going on. So knights are an explorer with wide-ranging interests and a craving for philosophical and spiritual conquest. This card is, they're fascinated by foreign people and ideas, and they'll go to great lengths to see the world, meet the multitudes, and experience all that life has to offer. Like his major arcana counterpart, the alchemical angel of temperance, he's willing to experiment, mix things up, and adapt along the way. He's impulsive, restless, and always on the move. The Knight of Wands also represents the mutable fire sign of Sagittarius, which makes them outgoing and audacious. They're flexible and carefree. He'll try anything once and maybe twice for good measure. His Sagittarian nature graces him with good fortune. As a result, he tends to think of himself as invincible, which leads to risky or dangerous behavior. Even so, he'd be the first to tell you that he's willing to go out in a blaze of glory. The Knight of Wands rules the third decan of Scorpio and the first and second decans of Sagittarius. In the natural horoscope, his primary domain is the 9th house of long-distance travel, philosophy, and higher education. Which again, when we think about all of those things like travel, philosophy, and higher education, like those are all levels of like journeys within themselves, right? We have like sort of the literal journey, the like mental or perhaps like emotional journey of philosophy. We're trying to understand sort of like existence or how we interact. And then we have higher education, right? The mental, intellectual side of pursuing knowledge. All right. In the Fearless Tarot book by Elliot Adam, they speak about the Knight of Wands is all about adventure, the urge for freedom, exploration, and adventure. He is the traveler of the tarot. Here, so in the Rider-Waite-Smith traditional depiction of the card, there's like a knight riding horseback, and again, the horse is sort of has two back legs down and the front two are up. And the knight almost looks like they're about to step onto the ground on the back of the horse, and we see pyramids behind them. So he's pictured visiting Egypt. He understands that by moving himself from the humdrum routines of day-to-day life, he can gain a wider perspective of who he really is, a passionate, confident, and adventurous spirit. When is the last time you halted routine and explored outside your home or work? Do you need a spontaneous vacation or a small getaway to regain perspective? Do you go to the same old restaurants and walk the same old streets every day in your community? The Knight of Wands is a bold figure. His little brother, as we talked about last episode, the Page of Wands, has a small red plume in his cap, right, which is a reference to the Fool. The Knight's blazing red plume is full. So if you, again, have the sort of traditional Rider-Waite-Smith depiction of the card, we get like a full red plume on the Knight, just like to associate with the Fool. His passions spur him onward towards new lands. The Knight of Wands doesn't sit around and think. He acts. He urges you to get out of your routines and expose yourself to something new. The world is wide open and waiting for you to experience it, right? So the Knight of Wands is associated with travel, and travel broadens the mind. It frees us from monotony and allows us to explore environments where people don't know our personal history. By exploring new places, you're on a journey of discovering yourself. When you return from a trip, your mind looks at the life you left behind with renewed clarity. It's called leaving the bubble. So even if you can't take big trips to exotic locations, right, even just going to somewhere new or connecting with new people can be that sort of journey or adventure. By seeing yourself as others see you, you might find that you're more interesting than you thought. So reclaim your spontaneity, go on an outing beyond your normal perimeters. Visit a restaurant with foods you haven't tried. Talk to people who don't look like you. Get excited and plan a large trip if you need a vacation. There is no excuse for being bored or boring when the Knight appears. The Knight of Wands can symbolize the feeling that you have traversed through a metaphorical desert, again with the sort of Egyptian pyramids that we see in the background of the traditional card. This has been testing your endurance and willpower, right? When we think of the desert, it's kind of a harsh place. There's lack of water, it's hot, it's hard to travel during the day. And the only way to arrive at the oasis is to keep going and don't stop. The Knight of Wands can represent an adventurous person who loves travel, movement, and freedom. It can be hard to pin them down, but they're the most marvelous company. Never try to trap the Knight of Wands through guilt, obligation, or pressure, or he will bolt. Knights can represent youngish adults of any gender. Knights are usually people who are phasing out of one way of life into another. So again, going on that sort of journey, exploring, figuring out what works for you, what new things you might want to take on, what old habits or patterns are not suiting you anymore, right? So in the Tarot for Change book, Jessica Dorr talks about that the Knight of Wands is all about the wild and unbridled appearance might not sync up with our mental image of preparing and taking appropriate action, but in truth, this is what making change often looks and feels like. If the wand suit relates to the spark of vitality in each of us, and the change we're making about establishing our connection to the often elusive but transformative flame, the one that drives creativity, fuels passion, and gives meaning to our lives, the Knight of Wands tells us, first off, that we might need to get a bit messy. Let's see. So an understanding of the Knight of Wands is having to do with breaking up stagnation is also relevant here. When it feels like you're locked inside of an ice house, the emphasis should be less on the specific things you need to do to stay alive and more on the fact that you're dancing at all, because movement is what going to generate heat, and heat is going to get the ice house walls melting, and melting is what's going to keep you alive. It might be while doing random weird dances, watching diligently for the walls to start sweating, and relentlessly praying that a patch of sky will poke through. A degree of faith in the unseen is needed, and that is a big message in the Wands suit. So this is also where the idea of the Knight of Wands as relating to commitment comes into play. When people who felt stuck a long time finally do take action to get unstuck, they sometimes get so comfortable busting up routines that it creates a kind of stuckness in reaction to the terror of ever getting stuck again. They start to see everything stable as perhaps that same sort of ice house and conflate security with being confined, so they dance endlessly. But without any grounding, like a triangle without a base, they float up and away and become lost. So again, when we look at the Knight of Wands cards, right, like they're also, if we just keep moving forever and are choosing movement over perhaps like stability or having a destination in mind, like we might become lost, right? We might be so stuck on continuing to move that we sort of end up in a place that we maybe didn't mean to. And that also, right, if we have been confined, like this, Jessica Dore talks about, once we get that freedom and movement, once we sort of get moving for the first time, we can have that sort of scared or protective part of ourselves trying to make sure we never get stuck again, right? Whether that's in a relationship or a job or right in a physical place like a house or an apartment that was not working well for you. Once we get out of that situation, it can feel really scary to kind of commit to anything again for fear that you're going to get stuck again. So this part is also about sort of, I guess, riding the line between, right, being able to move out of monotony of day to day life, or, right, like seeking the feeling of being unstuck and going and trying to broaden our perspective. And also that, right, that part of what broadens our perspective is that then we come back to our norm, our home, our culture, our family or chosen family. And then we get sort of, then we get to integrate, right? We get to decide what we want to keep from our travel time or our journey and what we want to maybe, right, like go back to routine with or go back to our habits with. Right, we don't have to necessarily keep everything that we did when we traveled. Maybe that's like eating out or, right, like going on walks every evening. Like if those are things that are important to you, right, keep doing it even when you come home. As someone who's spent time studying abroad or living abroad in other countries, I've often talked to other people who've done that about, right, how do you sort of embrace the creativity or excitement of being in another place where everything is new when you do come back to your like sort of normal day-to-day life without feeling like, ugh, my stable life or my consistent monotonous life feels so boring, and then always trying to seek the or having the desire to like, oh, I'm never happy in my home and in my routine, I'm only happy when I leave. And again, so trying to, how do we integrate, how do we incorporate, right, things or the parts of ourselves that we found out or explored when we were traveling or living in another place or even just spending time with other people, and bring that back to our lives to sort of, um, what's the right word? To sort of like bring that spark back into our day to day. And again, whether that's like still continuing to push yourself to try new restaurants or go to new locations or work from a different coffee shop every day or go to a library in different cities and see what they're like and work there, like we can still cultivate that same like energy and excitement about new things. And right, it can be just as wonderful to come back home to our everything that we love about our bed or like our pets or our climate or environment or yard, right? Again, I'm in springtime, so I'm so much has changed. I was gone over the weekend for just like 2.5 days, and when I come back, I'm like, oh, the flowers, they're blooming, or the tulips have opened up, or this or that. They're like so much can change in a small amount of time. And it can be wonderful to be away and see other, in my case, plants or environments or get more sunshine or things like that that maybe I don't have at home. And then when I come home, I'm still so appreciative of the sort of change or things that have happened while I was gone as well. Because sometimes that's the other part that can feel really hard is that when you come back, you sort of forget that like everyone else's lives or right, all of the plants or all of the people have continued moving on their lives or moving forward on their lives or on, again, as plants bloom and grow, even if in the small amount of time that you were gone. And sometimes that can feel that same level of like instability or fear of like, oh, I can never leave because then I'm going to be behind or I'm not going to be able to hang out with my usual friends or this or that. That can lend to us, right, being fearful of the adventure instead of appreciating what it brings us and then being able to integrate that into how we want to continue to live our lives day to day with that fresh perspective or trying new places or things, or just sort of cultivating the mindset that we sometimes only allow ourselves to have when we're on vacation or in a new place or visiting someone else. All right, so let's dive in and see what the cards have to say on this topic. I'm deciding what deck I'm going to pull from, and I think I'm going to pull from the Sasarabito Tarot deck by Stasia Burrington today. We're going to be thinking about, right, how do we integrate? How do we maintain our excitement and adventure without sort of losing our sense of self, or being maybe too risky, right? Again, those are other things that, right, maybe when you're on vacation, you do a lot more physical activity or outside a lot more, and that can feel wonderful. But sometimes it's not very sustainable. Maybe it's a thing where, again, it's sort of like, okay, yeah, I can sleep a little less when I'm out of town, or I can do this or that. I can eat different foods, and then like I can't actually maintain that forever. But that's okay. All right. Oh, interesting. I pulled another page. So I pulled the Page of Swords reversed. So I'm going to break out my book and take a look at that. So the Page of Swords, I'll read the upright and then I'll read the reversal, is all about honesty, integrity, and optimism. It says it's a messenger for future challenges. Stay clear, look problems right in the eye, and keep a strong mind. The young woman on this card stands tall, keeps integrity, and approaches things honestly. Use reason and have resilience. She approaches conflict with an optimistic, adventurous spirit. Energetic, the multiple eye motifs on her cape reinforce the virtue of keeping your eyes clear and open to new ideas. It says the birds in the background symbolize high ideals, freedom, and grand aspirations. And then reversed, where I did pull this in reverse, it says the youth of the page may indicate acting quickly without the appropriate foresight. Be mindful of your words and actions as you excitedly tackle your projects. So again, a little bit of, right, warning or caution of, right, we can get so excited, so wrapped up in things that maybe, right, we didn't inform the right people in our life about this new thing we were trying to do, or we didn't ask before we made a bunch of plans, or we didn't sort of get or collaborate with other people, and instead we just pushed forward without consulting the people that are going to be greatly impacted. And so it sounds like this card's just cautioning us a little bit of like, okay, right, we can have that excitement and energy of the Knight of Wands, and then, right, we just have to be mindful that our actions impact other people. And so also being cognizant of how other people are going to be impacted in your life. If, right, when you come back from a vacation, you're like, I'm going to do all these new things. I'm going to paint all the walls because I loved that color that I saw there. And then if you just go ahead and do it without, informing your partner or family or going ahead like that, right, there might be a little tension or conflict. And not that that is inherently bad, but just, right, be aware that even when we get these excitement and ideas and inspirations and adventurous insights, that if we want other people to be as excited, we kind of have to have buy-in. We have to collaborate, right? And it can be really fun to do so. Things might move faster. It might allow you to have someone to keep you accountable to the things that you're trying to do, right? Or keep in your life or change in your life. But also in the same way, right, when we're not considering other people, their feelings might get hurt if we make decisions without them. So just sort of keep that in mind. So links for the tarot decks I talk about will always be in the show notes and on my website if you like to look at them or purchase them. And thanks for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. Just as a reminder, the podcast comes out daily, Monday through Friday for all of 2025. All right, see you soon. Bye-bye.